Thanks for joining us on the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week, we continue to follow the well-being of Nigerians in the Baltic as the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. This time, we'll be talking about the welfare of Nigerians in Russia, where NATO and EU countries have imposed sanctions aimed at bringing Russia to the point where it calls off the war. Nigeria's ambassador to Russia and Belarus, Professor Abdullahi Shehu, will be joining us later. Also in Women's Month this March 2022. So interestingly, my next guest on the program is a woman. Jamaican Foreign Minister Kamina Johnson-Smith joins me in a conversation I had with her a while ago during her first visit to Nigeria. Let's get into it now. Diplomatic Channel begins right now with a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles, especially on the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Russia on Monday announced 6 humanitarian corridors to be opened around Ukrainian cities to allow civilians to escape. The announcement was made by the spokesperson of the Russian Defense Ministry, Igor Konashenkov. He says the first corridor is from Kiev to Homel, the other 2 from Mariupol to Zaporozhye and Rostov-on-Don, and the one from Kharkiv to Belgorod and Poltava. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says the country's Red Cross will provide humanitarian aid to Ukraine as soon as possible, praising partnership between China and Russia as rock solid. China has refused to condemn Russia's attack on Ukraine or call it an invasion, while asking Western countries to respect Russia's legitimate security concerns. Wang Yi says the causes of the Ukraine situation were and had not happened overnight, noting, using a traditional Chinese expression, that 3 feet of ice does not form in a single day. He says China is willing to continue to play a constructive role in pushing for peace and promoting talks, and is willing to work with international community to carry out necessary mediation when needed. Finally, the New Zealand government says it will introduce legislation to allow it to impose sanctions on Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the sanctions will give the country the ability to freeze Russian assets in New Zealand, prevent people and companies from moving their money and assets there to escape sanctions imposed by other countries, and also to stop super yachts, ships and aircrafts from entering the country's waters or airspace. When passed, it will be the first time New Zealand would have levied sanctions individually on a country.
Welcome back. It's been more than 10 days since Russia invaded Ukraine, and residents have been leaving in their numbers. The UN says more than 1.5 million people have now fled Ukraine into neighboring countries, and as many as 4 million could be displaced by the end of the war, whenever that is. According to the UK government, Russian forces have been targeting populated areas in several cities, and a ceasefire agreed last week is not holding up.
President Zelensky made the plea to world leaders, saying, quote, "We are people, and it is your humanitarian duty to protect us, protect people, and you can do it. If you do not do that, if you at least do not give us aircraft for us to be able to protect ourselves, there can only be one conclusion. You also want us to be slowly killed." End of quote. Earlier, he said the civilian airport in the city of Vinnymystia, 250 kilometers southwest of Kyiv, has been completely destroyed by Russian rockets. The fighting has taken place to the north and east of Kyiv and also in Ukraine's southern regions. President Zelensky also warned that Russian forces were preparing to bombard the southern city of Odessa. Almost 1 million people live in the historic port city on the Black Sea coast, which is close to the Moldovan border and the Russia-backed breakaway Moldovan region of Transnistria. In the meantime, civilian evacuations via humanitarian corridors in Mariupol and Volnovakha have been halted, causing a temporary setback to a truce between Russia and Ukraine. The British Ministry of Defense had said Russian forces would observe a truce in Ukraine starting at 10 o'clock Moscow time on Saturday to facilitate the evacuation of civilians via humanitarian corridors. As was agreed by the Ukrainian side, the humanitarian corridors would allow the exit of civilians from the two cities. Only a few people had been evacuated from Mariupol through the corridors. The nationalists prevented civilians from leaving, and 200,000 people from Mariupol and 15,000 from Volnovakha have still not been able to reach the humanitarian corridors. Mariupol's mayor, Vadim Boychenko, accused the Kremlin of lying to the Ukrainian authorities about the proposed evacuations. From his basement on a patchy phone line to anyone that would listen, with a Ukrainian flag behind him, Boychenko said the city had been under constant bombardment for 6 days. Meanwhile, there are fears by leaders that Moldova could be Putin's next hit. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today reassured Moldova's leaders that the U.S. would rally international opposition to Russian aggression whenever and wherever it occurs.
Countries have a right to choose their own futures. Moldova has chosen the path of democracy, a more inclusive economy, a closer relationship with the countries and institutions of Europe. The United States supports Moldova in those efforts, grounded in our respect for the neutrality that's enshrined in Moldova's constitution.
No one knows when the war will end. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia will only halt its military operation if Ukraine stops fighting and Moscow's demands are met. Russia insists its invasion of Ukraine by land, air and sea is a special military operation, which the president claims without any evidence is needed to denazify the country. He has reiterated that the assault is going according to plan and on schedule.
Hundreds of Nigerians, especially students, have fled the war in Ukraine and have made their way home already. Many more are scheduled to hop on those evacuation flights as well. A number of hard-hitting sanctions have been imposed by European and NATO countries on Russia. I thought to talk to the Nigerian ambassador to Moscow and Belarus on the welfare of Nigerians in a country of his posting amid the sanctions. Joining me now is Nigeria's ambassador to Russia and to Belarus, Professor Abdullahi Shehu. Professor Shehu, thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here again.
The last time we spoke, there was yet to be an invasion by Russia into Ukraine, and now that has happened, it's gone on for more than a week. What are your thoughts on the situation so far?
Well, it's an unfortunate situation that we have on our hands. Many people are not happy because there are many Russians in Ukraine, and they have their relatives in Russia, and there's a feeling of maybe something happening between relations. It's unfortunate. Nobody would like to see a war or whatever it is, but it has already started. The Russian authority tagged it a military operation, so we take it to be so.
I know the Nigerian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jeffrey Onyema, had a conversation with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba. Is the Nigerian ministry also in discussion with the Russian Foreign Ministry as well as regards this invasion and possibly the safety of Nigerians in both countries?
Well, certainly, Nigerian authorities are in touch with the Russian authorities with respect to how Nigerian citizens can be evacuated, and if the safe corridor can be allowed for Nigerian citizens to be evacuated through the Russian border. This is a possibility that we're exploring with the Russian authorities.
But you're already seeing the pictures on TV. People are trying to leave by themselves. Some of them are getting shot at by Russian soldiers as they try to get on the streets. What are you making of these pictures as you're seeing them, considering also the Nigerians are stuck in Sumy in Ukraine and have no way of escape?
Well, I think we need to be very careful about some of the pictures I am seeing, particularly on the social media. Some pictures that were taken 15 years ago happening elsewhere are being described as what is happening in a particular location. So I am a bit reticent at arriving at conclusion when I see pictures, even from reputable media organizations. Nevertheless, it's their job. I'm not saying that what they are saying is not correct, but I need to be very careful at interpreting whatever I see either on the media, formal media or social media.
I get what you're saying, but most of the pictures and the videos that we have seen have been from on the ground. You have Nigerian students who are recording videos of themselves, either in bunkers or in situations where they can't get out of. What do you make of those? I know that the encouragement that the Nigerian missions have given is for them to get to the border.
Yes.
But for those who are within,
certainly,
those who are still in the hinterland,
yes,
they can't get to the border. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, certainly we have even gotten in touch with some Nigerian students who are stuck at the Ukrainian State University in Sumy. But we can do nothing about it except if they are at the Russian border. They still remain within the territory of Ukraine, and it's the responsibility of the Ukrainian government to assist. Our embassy in Ukraine is exploring possibility of assistance for them to be evacuated through any of the safe corridors that have been created by the Ukrainian government.
You think it's possible they could be used as human shields by residents?
I'm not at the war front, so I'm not able to arrive at such conclusion.
I understand. The West, NATO, and European countries have imposed hard-hitting sanctions, economic, military, technological, and so on Russia. You're in Moscow. Are you also feeling the impact of these sanctions? You think they're having an effect on Russian people's lives and on the government as well?
No country in the world can say that it does not feel the impact of sanctions, no matter how limited. However, the Russian authorities have made it clear that they anticipated this, and they have made some contingency plans to absorb the shocks arising from the sanctions. As you could see, even in Nigeria, we are likely to feel the impact, because if we consider the major crops or commodities that we import from Russia, whether it's fertilizer or wheat, we are likely to feel the impact, even though Nigeria is far from the scene of the war. On a positive note, we could say that the oil price is rising. On the one hand, maybe Nigeria could benefit from that, but on the other hand, it means if Nigeria could produce optimally to its own OPEC quota before we can say, yes, Nigeria can benefit from that.
If I'm hearing you correctly, it means that the Nigerian community in Moscow and possibly in Belarus are not feeling the impact of any of the sanctions there. There have been no complaints, at least, to the Nigerian mission in Russia.
That who is not feeling the impact of the sanction?
That the Nigerian community in Moscow is not feeling the impact of the sanctions.
Who said so?
I'm just saying, from what you're saying that the Russian government already made contingency plans.
No. What I said is that no matter how powerful a country is, one way or the other, certain sanctions will affect it, no matter how limited.
What do you make of the Russian president's comments that he's made, two very distinct ones during this war? First, he said the worst is yet to come, and then he said the attacks will end when Russia's needs are met.
Well, such analysis is left for you in the media as a representative of my government. It is not my responsibility to come on the television to interpret what the president of Russia has said to the public. I'm only to sensitize the public regarding what is happening in Russia, and particularly for Nigerians who are in Russia or in Ukraine, to be at alert and also to be cautious in their conduct. President of a country has made a statement. That is statement from he's the overall authority there.
How would you describe Nigeria's relations with Russia now amidst this war?
It's very warm. It's very good. We have very good relations with Russia. We have good relations also with Ukraine.
It's pretty difficult reaching the Nigerian ambassador to Ukraine. So do you know if he's still in Ukraine?
Well, you have to find out from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Abuja. You can contact the spokesperson, or you can contact the Office of the Permanent Secretary. They will link you up with our ambassador in Ukraine.
Professor Abdullahi Shehu, thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you very much for your time.
To some more bilateral relations now, Nigeria and Jamaica held the fourth session of the Nigeria-Jamaica Joint Commission in Abuja from the 22nd to the 24th of February. Leading the Jamaican delegation to Nigeria was the country's Foreign Minister, Mrs. Kamina Johnson-Smith, who looked forward to the commission allowing both countries to celebrate and deepen long-standing relations. Nigeria's Foreign Minister, Jeffrey Onyema, said Nigeria is determined to build on the agreements of both countries in oil and gas, education, agriculture, and trade. So it is interesting that I feature Ms. Kamina Johnson-Smith this week, Women's Week and Women's Month on Diplomatic Channel. I had a chat with her before her meeting started on the Joint Commission in Lagos. Foreign Minister Kamina Johnson-Smith, it's a pleasure having you here, speaking to me on Diplomatic Channel. Welcome to Nigeria. It's your first visit to the country. What are you most fascinated about Nigeria?
Well, everything fascinates me about Nigeria, your history, your culture, our connections as people. I mean, Nigeria has one of the richest histories globally that anyone could embrace. And in addition to that, you have the largest youth population. You're Africa's largest exporter of oil. You have largest resources of natural gas. So the potential and the wealth and the incredible strength of Nigeria is a wonderful thing to behold. I'm pleased to be here.
You're here to attend the Nigeria-Jamaica Joint Commission. You'll be discussing areas of mutual interest. What can we expect this time? Well,
as you may know, the Commission has not met in several years. In fact, it hasn't met since 2014. So there's a lot of work to be done. We imagine that we will be revisiting some older arrangements, seeing what can be renewed, what can be repurposed, as well as finding new ground on which we can cooperate. We're looking at the technical side, that is health, education, culture, sports. We know there's so much we can do in those areas and have done. And then, of course, we're also looking at how we can foster trade and investment between Nigeria and Jamaica, using the geostrategic location of Jamaica to leverage Nigerian investments into the North and South America.
And it's been 50 years of diplomatic relations between Nigeria and Jamaica. Why has it taken so long, to actually put together a joint commission?
Well, the Joint Commission was actually established in 1989. It has met 3 times before in Kingston, Jamaica. This is the very first time it will be meeting in Nigeria. So in that sense, it is historic. We should have met in 2020, but the pandemic, of course. So we had hoped that we would have been celebrating, that grand occasion of 50 years. At the same time that we had the Joint Commission. COVID has affected so many things. This was one of them. For whatever reason, the engagement has waxed and waned. But what we can say is over the past 2 years, 3 years, maybe even 4, we've been working at how to deepen and strengthen significantly in tangible ways. And that's why I'm here.
How would you describe Nigeria-Jamaica relations at the moment?
Positive, holding great potential, and vibrant. Yeah.
I know that I spoke to the Nigerian High Commissioner to Jamaica and Belize almost 2 years ago, and that was when COVID hit,
Yes.
right? So I know the countries also, were affected by COVID. Jamaica also was affected. There were some restrictions put in place. What's the situation now?
So we still have a nightly curfew, but it's at 11 p.m. We still have some gathering restrictions. People, of course, expected to wear your masks. We're encouraging vaccination, but the vaccination rate is low, admittedly. We've not quite reached 25% yet, and that's still quite a challenge. But our credit rating has remained positive. We've been able to retain that from both Fitch and Standard & Poor's. Tourism is rebounding, and in fact, we had a very dynamic and innovative mechanism to allow visitors to continue to come to Jamaica. Starting maybe June 2020 was when we started to ease our opening of tourism only. And so economic activity is returning. It's a challenging time. We recognize it's quite a delicate balance for all governments, and there has to be a really sort of nuanced assessment of every domestic situation, because it depends on the vaccination rate. It depends on the mortality rate. Ours has thankfully been relatively low, all things considered, although our infection rate has been quite high for a small country.
Many Nigerians want to come to see Jamaica, but having to connect flights from different places is a real hassle. So where are we at with direct flights?
We are working on it. So as you may know, we've had our first inaugural flight, so we know it can happen. 2020, notwithstanding the pandemic, we had 130 Nigerians come on a direct flight to Jamaica.
And I think the Minister of Foreign Affairs was on that.
He was on that trip, and I agreed to do the flight myself, personally, together with my colleague, Minister of Transport and Mining. And I think we felt such a great sense of positivity that this had occurred, and the knowledge that it can therefore happen again. We're working on the Air Services Agreement. It's one of the matters that we will discuss further during the Joint Commission. It's been initial, but there are some issues through which we have to navigate. We are hopeful that we can make good progress on this trip, because we think that it will be, the people-to-people connections are going to exponentially increase once we get those flights regularly in place.
A lot of Nigerians in Jamaica, all of them doing good work, helping to, build the nation and so on. But there is just a small community of Jamaicans here. Why is that?
Maybe just distance, but it's not. While it's a small community, it's an old community, meaning Jamaicans have been coming to Nigeria for more than a century, living, contributing to the economy, to national development, science, health, education. We've, become a part of life, and they've, become Nigerians in and of themselves. And maybe the flights will allow for that to expand, that community to expand more, as we seek to expand trade and investment and other types of cooperation as well.
Well, many people may not know this, but Nigeria and Jamaica share a history in that a large number of slaves were taken from this West Africa, basically Nigeria, to your country to serve and to, build the nation as it is. Even, there are similarities between Patois and the Igbo language. I know that we don't teach history in Nigerian schools, but what sort of history is being taught to, the next generation, the generations alive today about, a Jamaican history, where people are from, where your ancestors are from, and so on?
From West Africa. We learned that from, you're 10 years old, you learn from you going to high school, that's secondary school. West Indian history is part of the curriculum, part of the mandatory curriculum, and part of West Indian history is slavery, and the fact that Africans were brought to the Americas, including to the Caribbean and Jamaica. So we are taught that we came from West Africa, so to a large extent, which is why we look like each other.
A part of your itinerary to Nigeria is the visit to Badagry, and I know that that's important because Badagry was the route that many of the slaves were taken through to other parts of the world, straight to the Atlantic, to other parts of the world, to the West Indies especially. How important is it for you to make that visit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the appetite continues to grow the more there is exposure of Nigerian culture, for example, through Nollywood. There's the movies are now sort of even glamorizing the concept of travel to Nigeria as well. I think that there's a lot to be found there. There's a lot of deep cultural affinity, a lot of a sort of primal love, if I call it, as foundationally as that. And I think that that can be tapped into very, very easily.
That's the program this week. Remember, you can watch Diplomatic Channel anytime. Just go to Channel's web and click on the playlist to find the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.